Good afternoon. This meeting of the General Laws, Housing and Consumer Protection Subcommittee will come to order. Members will indicate their presence on the electronic voting board. The clerk will close the roll. The quorum is present, so we're ready to begin. We've got a long docket today. I'm going to make it slightly shorter. Delegate McQuinn has sent me a note that she's asking for House Bill 1270 to go by for the day. I entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded that House Bill 1270 go by for the day. As many as favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. 1270 is by for the day. Look at that. We're already making progress. All right. I see Delegate McClure here. Or do you have, Delegate Kriesek, do you have someplace you need to be? All right, Delegate McClure. You've got House Bill 588.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute. I believe you all should have it.
All right. Is there a motion on the substitute?
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. We adopt the substitute. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed? The substitute is properly before us. Delegate McClure, please present the bill with substitute.
Do you have the language of the substitute?
I'm sorry.
The language for the substitute? Oh.
Right.
Okay, you got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, may I proceed with presenting the bill?
Yes.
Okay. HB 588 makes it easier for tenants to adjust and cope with the aftermath of a fire or casualty damage incident and prevents abrupt displacement without being unduly burdensome to landlords. Under current law, if a rental unit is damaged by fire or some other accident, the landlord can terminate the lease with only 14 days notice to the tenant, and the landlord has no obligation to meet with the tenant to discuss reasonable alternatives to immediate displacement. So tenants currently have no recourse if they believe that their unit is still habitable and the initial unit assessment is incorrect. So it is unrealistic to expect tenants to secure new housing during these difficult situations, and it is extremely hard, if not impossible, for anyone to find new rental housing in 2 weeks. So HB 588 requires landlords to make reasonable efforts to meet with tenants whose units have been damaged by fire or other casualties to discuss the extent of the damage and whether there are reasonable alternatives to terminating the tenancy. If the unit is truly uninhabitable, the landlord must determine whether there is a similar unit that is habitable and available for rent within the same reasonable time frame, and if so, offer that unit to the tenant at the same rental rate. If there's no comparable unit available, the landlord can terminate the rental agreement within 21 days with written notice to the tenant. And if the tenant receives the termination notice and disagrees that the unit is uninhabitable, they can ask the landlord to have the condition of the unit reevaluated and must be involved in the reevaluation process. If the landlord determines that the fire or casualty damage caused by the tenant, if it's caused by the tenant, then the landlord can terminate the lease agreement within 21 days notice to the tenant without the meeting requirements previously mentioned. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I witnessed the need for this bill in my district, House District 2, when a fire broke out in the boiler room of the Crystal Plaza Apartments on August 21st of last year. 3 weeks later, a community-wide notice was sent out to inform residents of 68 units that they would be forced to vacate their apartments in 14 days. So that's 2 weeks, and residents reported that this eviction notice was the only communication that they received regarding the situation since the fire occurred. The landlord was reasonable and took the time to work with the tenants after he received immense feedback from the community, and the landlord had a third-party expert come in and reassess the damage. And as a result, only 20 units were found to need immediate repairs. So that went from 68 to 20 units. Since then, I have personally met with the landlord of Crystal Plaza Apartments multiple times, and we worked together to craft this bill to prevent abrupt displacement in the aftermath of fire casualty damage for tenants across Virginia. And Mr. Chairman, this bill is a product of these conversations, and I'm happy to report that we have achieved peace in the Valley with all stakeholders, and it's my hope that you report 588 to the full committee.
Thank you for that very thorough presentation. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? All right. I hear that we have peace in the Valley. If anybody is here in support of the bill, if you just kind of line up and nod your heads that yes, you in fact support it. Is there anybody here who's against it still? Because I heard that nobody is. All right. Seeing none, the committee operates by motion. Delegate Price. Oh, Delegate Price has a question. Go ahead.
Yes. Delegate McClure, I just wanted to make sure that when you say that the damage was caused by the tenant's violation, is that like willful causing and not just like there was an accident or there was bad wiring within the unit, and it just so happened to be in the unit versus the boiler room.
Yep, defer to expert.
We're going to have a phone a friend here. If you could identify yourself for the record and see if you can help answer the question.
Thank you, Christy Mara with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Delegate Price, under 55.1-1227, which is what is referenced in that code section, that is, and I don't have it in front of me, but the intent of the stakeholders, and I can't tell you if 55.1-1227 does exactly this, was that the damage be caused by the negligence of the tenant or an actual willful act of the tenant. And I'm happy to go pull up 1227 and just can confirm in a second if that actually it's the code section, but I believe it is that encapsulates that same understanding, that same bent.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Price.
If I could ask counsel, because I have it up as well, but I also know that I'm not a lawyer, and I just want to make sure that if it was like an accident and it just so happened to be in the unit, that that's not excluded within this.
Madam Counsel, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Price, yes, that is correct. There would have to first be a finding that they violated the tenant's duties to maintain fit premises under 1227, and then they would be able, that provision would come into play.
I would also note that there is language there specifically as to removing, tampering, or properly with a properly functioning smoke alarm installed by the landlord, including removing any working batteries and so forth. So I think specifically that'll bring in a situation where if the tenant deliberately disabled their smoke detector, and that's the reason you had a fire that caused damage that would have been prevented by the smoke detector, that'd be one of those situations. So I think that's sort of why we drew that code section in, it sounds like.
No, I just wanted to clarify the apartment and office
who are
building.
you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I know who you are, but...
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bisma Ahmed with the Apartment and Office Building Association and the Virginia Apartment Management Association. We support the bill. We work with Delegate McClure to come up with language just to make sure and put an amendment just to make sure that, according to the evidence, if somebody lights the unit on fire or something like that, it wouldn't apply in that case. But other than that, we love the bill.
So, thank you. All right, Delegate Price, you satisfied with that answer?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion?
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded the bill report with substitute. As many as favor that motion will indicate their preference on the electronic voting board. The clerk will close the roll, and the bill reports by a vote of 7-1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Anything else before us, Delegate McClure? Is that it for you today? All right. Delegate Garrett, you've got a bill about fireworks.
Now, Mr. Chairman, thank you, members of the committee. I never want to start off by taking exception with the characterization of the chair as it relates to the nature of the bill, but this bill is about fireworks. What it's really about
Freedom.
is underfunded core services. I want to talk briefly about aid to localities, and I'm going to take Cumberland County for my district, where the aid to locality budget for Cumberland County for fire and rescue is $41,000. With $41,000 there to maintain 4 fire stations, fire trucks, equipment wherein one Jaws of Life could cost $15,000 by itself, in a world where the cost of one Oshkosh Stryker fire truck is $700,000. So what this bill does is it creates a local option with a 10% tax from the revenue derived from the sale of these products to the locality specifically earmarked for public safety, for fire and rescue. So while this bill is on its face about fireworks, Mr. Chair, it's really about ensuring that the women and men of rural Virginia have the assets they need to protect not just rural Virginians, but the motoring public who go through those communities. And this is a bill about accountability. In this bill is a licensure requirement for anyone who would engage in this activity. And this is a bill that says that it's okay if dollars from Maryland and North Carolina go to pay for schools in Virginia. Mr. Chairman, there is a friendly amendment that will be moved, I believe, backed by VDE Virginia Department of Fire Protection. This only changes the portion of the code wherein we outline that you must be of a certain age to purchase these fireworks. We'd originally placed it in a place in the code where it was awkward and unwieldy. Just puts it in the right place. But back to where I was, there's a 10% tax included in this on top of the sales tax would come back to the Commonwealth for the localities. This addresses shortcomings in our horrific Virginia Constitution's funding formula for local governments and helps them address woefully underfunded public safety budgets. And then there's a 3% tax on top of that, which would go to the fire marshals to ensure that we are revenue arguably neutral. I think this will generate revenue for the Commonwealth in the form of sales tax. And the point that I attempted to make earlier, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, about tax dollars from Maryland and North Carolina paying for schools and infrastructure in the Commonwealth of Virginia is this. Because this is a local option and knowing a little bit about the Commonwealth, I know that some localities will choose not to do this, and that's okay. I want these localities to be able to choose not to do this. But if you live in Emporia, Greenville on the North Carolina line, where a single dollar to adequately educate our children is hard to come by, and by the way, money's fungible, so that money that goes to fund that public safety budget can replace money then to send back to our schools. But if you live in those areas, the revenue generated by people from North Carolina driving a few miles across the Virginia line to buy fireworks may be the difference between a career and vocational training program in a school that changes a child's life. It may be the difference between, depending upon what the legislative agenda plays out like this year, a school lunch or breakfast. This money matters in these communities. So while it might not be right for, say, for example, Arlington, it's world-changing on the I-95, I-85, I-81 corridor in Southside Virginia and in rural Virginia. So with that, I would submit to any questions members of the committees have or what pleases the chair. I do have a number of entities here to speak in favor of the bill, including entities who historically have been opposed to this sort of legislation. And I will say that there may be an entity that speaks in opposition to the bill. I have made accommodations to them to have a delayed enactment of this bill to January of 25 should it pass. And I think, candidly, if the legislative session were longer than 60 days, that we would probably be able to get them on board too. But this is about freedom, economic opportunity. It's about underfunded core essential services. It's about schools. It's about letting those clowns in Maryland and North Carolina pay for our kids' education. Thank you.
Thank you. So it sounds like we've got a substitute that needs to be adopted here. So is there a motion properly seconded to adopt the substitute? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, the substitute is before us. Any questions from members of the subcommittee? Delegate Price.
Yes, thank you. Just because I'm not as familiar, can you give us some examples of what types of fireworks would be included and what is permissible?
I ain't trying to be smart. I like the good kind. So as you drive through South Carolina or Tennessee or West Virginia or these places and you see fireworks vendors that allow for the sale of display fireworks, the publicly permissible fireworks that are allowed under federal law to be sold to consumers would be allowed in Virginia where the locality chose to allow it. And there would be a license requirement. There would be, again, more tax increases that I've ever supported in any bill I've ever carried.
I noticed that.
In conjunction with this. But again, for lay people, the good kind of fireworks would be allowed to be sold.
Delegate Price.
Yes, the good kind, as you say, does that include ones that make noise and go boom, or are these like
Yes,
sparkling?
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Chair, follow up.
Delegate Price.
And what considerations, if any, have there been for those that might be our veterans who've served with PTSD or pets? Because I do know, especially in my locality, they ask us not to use fireworks in our neighborhoods for those reasons, to take into consideration the people that find it hard to endure July 4th and days of those days.
Sure. So the considerations that would be taken are those that were prescribed by people like Thomas Jefferson when he said the government closest to home governs best. Localities would have the option to allow this or not allow this. I'm a veteran who served. I've spent time in Bosnia. I've spent time in Syria, Iraq, Ukraine. And so I'm very sympathetic to your question. I think it's an excellent question, but I want to power these decisions down to local government. And what we hear from our local government is that the revenue stream that would be created by this would be world-changing as it related to opportunities for our children, for our public safety community. So that what the consideration is communities don't have to do this. And I know that all communities aren't the same, but our local governments and our communities are hopeful that we're successful.
Any other questions from members of the subcommittee? All right, anybody here in the audience wishing to speak in favor of the bill? And this advice goes for everybody, so if you could all listen in. So if you're going to speak in favor of a bill, again, try to be brief. If you're the second or third person in line and the person in front of you has said what you wanted to say, it's okay to say that it's already been said and you associate yourself with their comments. Because sometimes being redundant will not enamor you to the people that have to vote on your bill. So with that said, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Spencer Willard, I'm with the State Fire Marshal's Office. So we historically, for a number of years, have opposed any changes in the fireworks code. Delegate Garrett's office did reach out to us, and we worked with him on this legislation that is in the substitute that you found. We feel like this is a good version of this legislation that we've seen come up every year in the General Assembly, and so we are in support of this legislation, and we hope that it will offer an avenue for our localities to see more funding for their fire protection.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak in favor of the bill? All right, anyone here in the room wishing to speak in opposition to the bill, please step forward.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Jennifer Pike with the Virginia Professional Firefighters. We appreciate the delegate bringing this bill to our attention and bringing it forward. I know his intent is good. However, we have historically opposed this bill, and we continue to do so. We are concerned about the increase in fire service calls that will be associated with the influx of bringing fireworks that will be readily available to the people in Virginia. So with this, we oppose this bill.
And if you wouldn't mind, the delayed enactment clause doesn't make you feel any better about this bill?
Not at all.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I am Bonnie Atwood, David Bailey Associates, and today I'm representing the Virginia Fire Prevention Association. We oppose the bill, even with the delayed enactment. We need time to talk to all the jurisdictions about the consequences, including, even though they can opt out, they may be adjacent to a county that has opted in. So they've got fireworks across the street. It's their problem too. And I just want to make one brief mention of the PTSD thing. I was a rehabilitation counselor for 4 years before I was a lobbyist. I have a son with autism. I was president of the Autism Association, and I know the devastating effects of sudden, loud noises, not to mention the physical dangers of fireworks. Therefore, we oppose the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, come on up. Don't be shy. Everybody tries to stay out of everybody else's camera shot. I've discovered you all have learned what the camera angles are.
Never been shy.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Ed Rhodes, representing the Virginia Association of Rescue Squads and the Virginia chapter of the International Association of Arson Investigators. We have historically been opposed to this bill, and I concur with what Ms. Atwood and the VPFF has said. There will also be an increase in EMS calls besides fire calls. We oppose the bill. Thank you.
All right, and we have one person signed up online. I don't know if he's available or not. We can pull him up. Yes, we've got Mr. Keith Johnson with the Fire Chiefs Association of Fire Chiefs Association and Loudoun County. Mr. Johnson.
Chief Chair, members of the committee, Keith Johnson, the current fire chief in Loudoun County, representing Loudoun County and the Virginia Fire Chiefs Association as past president. I appreciate Delegate Garrett's avenue to increase revenue. We have a House bill and Senate bill that is attempting to do that for our fire service. We need funding. However, I don't see funding at the sacrifice of injuries to our citizens as a way to increase our funding. I also am a fire marshal in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have been involved in many firework incidents, both on the professional side and the homeowner side of fireworks. I would argue that I don't see good fireworks. All fireworks in my job that increase calls and injuries are dangerous, including sparklers. And I don't want to see another person in the Commonwealth injured by fireworks. I've seen enough. And this bill will expand the use of consumer fireworks, which is something that we are against. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Delegate Garrett, you get the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think he just suggested banning sparklers. I oppose that too. I just want to say that I think it's interesting when we live in what I would argue is denial. What we can't deny is that our local public safety communities are horrifically underfunded, that our Constitution of Virginia gives funding options to localities that are far too narrow to meet the incredible needs in this post-COVID world. We can't deny that every 4th of July we hear these loud noises across the Commonwealth. We know this. They're here. The difference between those fireworks and these is that the opportunity created by the sale of those products creates a brighter future for young men and women in South Carolina and Tennessee and West Virginia. So it's like trying to close Pandora's box. In fact, this really sort of mirrors the marijuana policy of Alabama. We're acting like we live in a world where the state line stops interstate commerce, and it's unrealistic. So what we ought to do is consider that it's nice that they have adequate funding for public safety in Loudoun, but they don't in Cumberland, they don't in Buckingham, they don't in Prince Edward, they don't in Fluvanna, they don't in Goochland, they don't in Emporia, in Greenville, in Mecklenburg, and Charlotte. And I'm trying to create a circumstance where I can serve my constituents like you serve yours. I have worked with everyone. I got the fire safety board on board, but I love my constituents like you love yours. And this isn't about fireworks. This is about opportunity. This is about public safety, because we can do better by our citizens when we actually fund our fire and rescue communities. And this is about recognizing that those fireworks are already here. And the only difference, Mr. Chair, is that the revenue is going to other states and not to Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with the committee, we operate by motion.
Second.
It's been moved and probably seconded the bill report. Any substitute motions? All right, the clerk will put it on the board.
I'm sorry, I may close, it's report with a substitute, I believe, right?
Report with the substitute.
Yes, report with substitute.
And probably refer to appropriations, but I don't think we need to worry about that. We didn't have a letter, so. The clerk will close the roll. The bill fails to report on a vote of 2 to 6. Thank you, Delegate Garrett, for your presentation. Thank you. All right, Delegate Glass, you ready? All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. This bill includes an emergency clause, so I'm not necessarily, I want to say 100% sure of the procedure, if that needs to be moved or acknowledged first.
Well, is it, so we were talking about House Bill 352? Oh, because you need an amendment to add an emergency clause. Okay. Is there?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Is that a substitute, or are we just going to do a line amendment to add an emergency clause? It's a line amendment. So, as many as favor of the line amendment adding the emergency clause will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, the motion carries. So the bill as amended is now before us.
Gratitude, Mr. Chair. So that emergency clause is for obviously immediate implementation, reflecting the need to prevent any further legal actions caused by the necessity of the bill. The summary of this legislation is that it's about aligning our Virginia Residential Landlord and Tenant Act to federal law and a proactive measures to protect service members. So we seek in this bill to remove that 35-mile-an-hour requirement by the VRLTA, aligning our state law with current federal law standards. The recent legal action has been taken by the Department of Justice against Virginia landlords who imposed early terminations in contradiction with federal law, and so that underscores the necessity of this of the alignment. And that is essentially what the bill does, is just put us in compliance with federal law as it pertains to how service members are able to terminate their leases due to service needs.
Gotcha. So we don't have folks looking at the Virginia code thinking it works one way and unintentionally, therefore violating federal law, right? We want to get them lined up.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any questions from members of the subcommittee? Anybody here wishing to speak in favor of the bill, just stand up. Anybody here opposed? All right.
Move to report.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to report with an amendment to add the emergency clause as the proper motion, I think. So it's been moved and seconded. The clerk will open the roll. Clerk will close the roll. The bill reports by a vote of 8-0. Thank you,
Gratitude,
Delegate
Mr. Chair and
Glass.
Committee.
All right, Delegate Watts. And if you're a patron and you're anxious to have your bill heard, move towards the center so you can be in my line of sight. Otherwise, I might miss you. Delegate Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am presenting House Bill 214, which essentially the intention of this bill is to codify a recent Virginia Employment Commission's ruling where a particular self-managed homeowners association, a common interest community, was brought before the commission for not properly treating the payment that is authorized, as you see in the language in the bill before you on lines 21 through 25, as far as in 54.1, as far as a self-managed volunteer community can provide compensation for very specific purposes to a resident of that community. And it was that payment that the Virginia Employment Commission was questioning whether or not that established an employer-employee relationship. And so again, the ruling came forward, and the Homeowners Association, while they played for the legal representation necessary to deal with the situation, and whereas the back payment due wasn't all that much, and they would have done it, but they really felt that they wanted to get the ruling from the Virginia Employment Commission about this relationship, because it would apply then to other self-managed communities that may also be paying some compensation for bonded services done by residents. And so that is the language before you. It establishes then on lines 22 and 23 that such resident shall be presumed to be an independent contractor, and that nothing here is going to get away with whatever is required by taxes down on line, tax payment down on line 44 and 45. And then most importantly, I believe, is the way in which on lines 97 through 100, it is described that the employing unit created by 54.1 is only where the services provided to such employing unit are limited in scope, provided by a resident, and as described in the code section, subsection that I was referring to. So I think this is tightly defined to cover just this situation and not any other employment relationship, either by a voluntary or professionally run CIC.
Gotcha. Thank you, Delegate Watts. Questions from members of the subcommittee? I see that Delegate Price has her light on.
Yes, thank you. And so we know that sometimes going in the route of independent contractor is used and abused in order to mistreat employees. So this is not what you're saying. You're saying that this is a Virginia Employment Commission ruling that you're trying to codify so people understand how to go about it, and that this was the proper action to take for this tightly drawn scenario. Is that correct?
Tightens it up.
Okay,
because again, it is only a resident of the community that has stepped forward to do what I'm going to say important services to the functioning, particularly bookkeeping, functioning of the voluntarily run CIC, not professionally run.
Any other questions from members of the subcommittee? Anyone wishing to speak? I'm sorry, Mr. Arnold. I didn't. Delegate Arnold.
Question for council, Mr. Chair. Council, is a resident of the community, of the common interest community, prohibited from providing management services?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Delegate Arnold, a resident of the common interest community is allowed to provide bookkeeping, billing, and record keeping. That doesn't necessarily qualify them as a community manager. I believe the Board of Common Interest Communities is the one who licenses actual managers.
Thank you, Council.
Okay. All right, so is there anyone here wishing to speak in favor of the bill? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the bill? Anyone who's sort of neutral but thinks we need to know more about the bill? All right, so I will say, and then we'll take it to a vote. And I've told you this before, I have a little bit of discomfort. I believe you when you say this is really narrowly, tightly drawn to a specific situation. The line 99, where it says that essentially no employee unit shall be determined to be an employer for the purpose of this section, it gives me a little bit of heartburn in that we're taking away that's their job at VEC to make these determinations. So we're not really giving them guidance on how to make their determinations. We're telling them you won't determine this when these facts apply. And maybe that's codifying the decision. It makes me a little uneasy. That'd be my only comment on the bill. That said, the committee operates by motion. Oh, you want to respond?
If I could just respond, I understand the concern, and this is why I know in drafting I was very determined to try to, we're going to say belts and suspenders. I was certainly involved in the original code section and the limits there that you can only do compensation if bonded to a resident for very limited services of the functioning of the commission. And then when it comes to this writing, it not only refers to that code section, but it describes it and says, in case you wonder, limited in scope provided by a resident.
Okay. All right. So we're ready for a motion?
Move to report.
It's moved and seconded that the bill report. As many as favor of that motion will indicate on the electronic voting board. And the chair votes aye. The bill reports by a vote of 5-3. Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
All right. Delegate Martinez, you've got two bills. If you want to step forward. Your first bill is HB 192. Do you want to do 192 first, or do you want to do 364 first?
Chairman, I appreciate you and the committee listening to me on these bills. On Bill 192, what I would, after hearing testimony today in this hearing, and also to talking to other delegates that also have the landlord and tenant fairness in mind, I think that my bill is probably a little redundant, and so I ask for the committee to go ahead and strike it, and let's move on to the other one.
All right, so there's motion properly seconded to strike House Bill 192. That's a recorded vote. And Delegate Quinter likes the bill a lot, doesn't want to strike it. No. The clerk will close the roll, and the bill is stricken 8-0.
I appreciate the delegate support at the last.
Delegate Martinez, if you'll suspend for 1 second. Delegate Shin, are you here for more than one bill? Are you okay? Never mind. All right, Delegate Martinez, go ahead. You now have before us
House Bill
364.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair. My bill, HB 364, amends the Code of Virginia to give localities the right to acquire the installation of automatic water-based fire protection systems in new townhomes construction. That's new townhomes construction. It does not enforce the requirement on localities, but instead provides locality the autonomy to choose to require them in their area should they see it. Well, many oppose the bill and might cite issues such as affordability and precedence. I think it is important to emphasize that the most significant impact of this bill is that it has the potential to save lives. And if you'll indulge me to add a personal note, my son had purchased a townhome with sprinkler systems, and he did not consider the price of a sprinkler system in his home an issue. What happened, though, is he had a dryer fire, and the sprinkler system came on. And now what most people would think that when a sprinkler system comes on, it impacts the whole dwelling, but it doesn't. It's localized. And what ended up happening is it put out the dryer fire. The fire department came and took care of the situation. And yeah, there was some water damage on the floor, but it saved 2 lives and 2 dogs. And so, I on a personal note, I think the addition of a sprinkler system, especially in new townhomes, would more than save lives. Now, I do know that there's some concern about the additional cost. Well, in the construction of a new townhome, they have a requirement to do a 2-hour firewall. When you have a sprinkler system, the requirement goes down to a 1-hour firewall, which reduces the cost of the construction itself. Enough that in some points it could be revenue neutral or cost neutral, however you want to call it. But not only that, there's also been the issue about water and how it impacts the water meters. I have an irrigation system at my house. Essentially what it is, it's a sprinkler system that's in the ground. This is a sprinkler system in the house. There was no impact on my water meter. There is no impact on the water meter. And the pressure is consistent. So in that instance, we're looking at not a lot of cost, but the potential to save a lot of lives. I do have Keith Johnson, Fire Chief and representative of the Fire Chiefs Organization online. And I'm just trying to see if there was I think I covered all the points I
think so.
I think I did, and I appreciate your indulgence.
All right, and so we'll get to Mr. Johnson in a moment. First, are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Delegate Martinez? All right, seeing none. Anybody in the room wishing to speak in favor of the bill, please step forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jennifer Pike with the Virginia Professional Firefighters, and we support this bill.
Mr. Chairman, Ed Rhodes representing the Virginia chapter of the American Fire Sprinkler Association, and we wholeheartedly support the bill.
Okay, and then we've got Mr. Keith Johnson online.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, again, Keith Johnson, representing Virginia Fire Chiefs Association and Loudoun County as their fire chief. I wholeheartedly support the installation of residential sprinklers. One, it saves lives and prevents property damage. The requirement for residential sprinklers has been in the model codes, the ICC model code since 2009. And each code cycle, Virginia removes that requirement from the model codes and deletes the requirement. I want to point out that these are residential sprinkler systems. These are not what you see in the room above your head. These are systems that run off the existing domestic water supply. So basically the heads that operate in a sprinkler system that Delegate Martinez offered to you are nothing more than adding a toilet or a sink. They run off the same domestic water supply. They do not require inspection yearly. They are not something that requires increased water size or meters or separate lines. They are cost neutral in the sense mostly that they are offset by incentives, increased fire hydrant spacing, increased turnaround distances, and certainly the reduction of firewalls and other incentives. Their average cost is about, for a 2,000 square foot townhouse, is about $2,700. Again, offset by additional costs. This has been through the Board of Housing and Community Development through a work group. It was non-consensus between the fire and building officials in that group, and so forth. And during the 2021 code cycle, testimony was not even allowed during this. So we urge that we're not trying to legislate the building code at all, but we see this as a valuable incentive to save lives and property at a very reduced cost to homeowners. Thank you.
So, Mr. Johnson, if you could back up for something you said and explain this to me a little bit more slowly. And I appreciate you going fast. I'm not being critical. I just want you to slow down for 1 second on one point. So you talked about something being in somewhere and then Virginia deleting it. Can you just back up and explain to me just a little bit about how that process works?
Yes, sir. So Virginia adopts the International Code Council, the model codes. So every 4 years, those codes are adopted at a national level. Virginia adopts those codes, but they have the opportunity to amend parts of the building code and fire code and remove certain things. The requirement for townhomes, actually the requirement for sprinkler systems is for townhomes and single family homes in that code. Virginia removes that requirement altogether and deletes that requirement. So in essence, they're not required. Okay. I will offer, Delegate Martinez said, this is a local option. All we're asking for is the ability for a locality by ordinance to allow this. We're not making it mandatory.
No, understood. And then I guess when you say Virginia takes it out, and again, maybe somebody else here can expand on this, but it's not me. I didn't do it, right? And the governor doesn't do it. So when you say Virginia takes it out, who is it that takes it out on behalf of Virginia?
That is the Board of Housing and Community Development that takes that out. As a matter of disclosure, I sit on that committee. I'm not speaking for them, but I am a member of the Board of Housing and Community Development. I'm in that process. That board takes that requirement out. They vote to take it out.
And we as a legislature have given them the authority to set the code. Got it. All right. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate your backing up for me and explain it to me slowly. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone here in the room wishing to speak in opposition to the bill? Mr. Clark.
Mr. Chairman, Andrew Clark with the Home Builders Association of Virginia. And I think before getting to costs in the process, this is as Chief Johnson, who I've got a lot of respect for, mentioned, this is a regulatory board that looks at a document that deals with everything from the construction of this building to everything in Virginia. It's a highly technical document. Builders, building code officials, fire officials spend, I think the last code cycle was 40 meetings, almost all day long, going through these proposals, making sure they fit, Virginia's market and whether we're not, we're balancing life, safety, welfare, and affordability when it comes to the housing piece. Despite Chief Johnson's comments, we actually had a special work group that focused 4 meetings all day specifically on this matter and debated deliberately. I mean, we went all day talking about this issue, and presentation from one of the, I think the national experts on fire sprinklers did say in many cases you do have to install a 1-inch meter in homes. You've got to upsize a meter to accommodate the added sprinkler. And if you look at your local water connection fees, that's where a lot of the cost is coming from. I think in Chesterfield, Prince William, you can get up to $15,000 to $20,000 per unit. So that's a pretty significant cost. And this is not about cost. I totally understand the safety argument, but we also have to make sure that we're not pricing people out of a product that's intentionally meant to be the more affordable option. We've got to kind of balance those two things. So we'd ask that you oppose the bill and really allow Virginia's nationally recognized building code process to continue as it is. Happy to take any questions.
Mr. Chairman, Randy Grumbine, representing the Virginia Manufactured and Modular Housing Association. I'll associate my comments with Mr. Clark's and would just add that if we allow items to be debated here for the building code, we're going to have every new product, new water heaters, new shingles, new windows come before you to decide, is this the best product to improve the housing situation for Virginians? And for that reason, we too oppose adding sprinklers through this process. I would just add that we just introduced a duplex manufactured home that is going to retail for around $80,000 for each section. So adding sprinklers to that would increase that cost on that unit probably in the 10% neighborhood. So again, we would oppose the adding of that. Thank you.
Anybody else wishing to be heard? The microphone. Anybody else wishing to be heard on this bill?
Good afternoon. I'm Jay Hicks. I'm a representative of the Fredericksburg Area Builders Association, and I would join in the comments on the gentleman, Mr. Clark, and I didn't pick up the name of the other gentleman who opposed this bill. The body that's in place to approve building codes is there administratively. It is not a part of the legislative process, and we're not only talking about removing you all as a contributor to that decision, but we're putting in the hands of the local officials, which is a complete bypass of the administration process. Thank you.
So anybody wishing to speak? Let's start with Delegate Austin, then Delegate Price.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question to the patron.
The delegate may proceed.
Mr. Delegate Martinez, is this currently permissive in the code?
That I would have to defer to Fire Chief.
It's not prohibited in the code, is it? Is it prohibited in the code anywhere?
I would have to defer to Keith Johnson. He's the one that is my expert.
So, I think the question is, I think what he's trying to ask, maybe if you don't mind my trying to rephrase.
Sure,
right?
please.
So your bill would allow localities to require sprinklers. I think what Delegate Austin is asking, is there anything in the building code that prohibits a builder who wants to from installing heavy water sprinklers and then marketing it that way and saying, hey, listen, we've got the safest townhomes around. They come equipped with sprinklers, they're extra safe and so forth. And the market decide that somebody wants to buy a house that's got these enhanced sprinkler systems. So nothing stops builders if the market would bear it, if they're in fact cost neutral and they thought there was some benefit to doing it, from doing it. Is that
Mr. Chairman, you're correct. My apologies for not quite understanding the question.
Maybe I didn't ask the question properly.
There is nothing that prohibits. And may I respond to some of the comments made?
Justice, I want to give you the last word.
Okay. Thank you.
I promise. But let's see if there are any questions from other members. Delegate Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question might be best addressed to Mr. Clark, but I defer to you, Mr. Chairman. There was a reference to Prince William County, what the increase would be per unit there. I didn't catch that. Could you repeat that and then maybe speak a little bit more to the overall maybe second, third order effects to that impact?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Prince William, so for every house, townhome, any structure, you've got localities require a water connection fee, whole series of fees just to hook up to the public main. And that's where a lot of the cost of the sprinkler comes in, is that hookup fee. So going from a 3/4 inch to a 1 inch is often a significant jump. Prince William, I want to say, is around 20 to 30. It's around there. Most of the time, most localities that will going to a 1 inch is a pretty significant jump. I may have some additional information, but that's where a lot of the cost comes from.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. All right, Delegate Martinez, you get the last word or words.
So let me talk about the hookup fees. Hookup fees are part of the new construction for every development. And the cost for any additional hookups are distributed and already part of the hookup fee. I have been on the Leesburg Town Council for over 20 and a half years. We have dealt with these kind of issues. Now, the question I ask is, we have been putting sprinklers in townhomes, homes, buildings like this for years. Why is it being waited on so long to finally enact something that the localities can do to safely have developments put in to protect our residents? And so the fact that, they're using hookup fees is part of your development process. And it's already in the cost of the house. And I'm trying to remember, there was another comment, and I can't quite get the response in my head yet, but the bottom line is that these are all excuses that we could have done years ago. But we haven't, because a lot of the interests of the builders has thwarted it. And what I am saying is that we need to take the safety of our residents and allow the towns, counties, localities, the autonomy to make these decisions for the residents. And this is what is going to help them do that. And I know as a former town council mayor, vice mayor, this is something that we have been looking for. And I am asking for your support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Delegate Martinez, I appreciate that. And as a former chief aide to the Board of Supervisors chairman in Fairfax County many years ago, and our Uber chair, I think, is related to a former Fairfax County Board of Supervisors chairman. I certainly understand the desire for local control. I will say, just as a matter of background, this committee hears a lot of bills like this where we have, as a legislature, delegated rulemaking authority specifically to boards that we then staff and populate with various industry members and fire safety experts and others. And the idea is that we want to let the experts on those issues sort of hash those things out and produce documents and produce a code, building code and so forth that represents, again, that best technical expertise, professional expertise, and those hours and hours of work groups. And to the extent we get some consensus, that's great. And then occasionally what happens is somebody, feels like they I want to say won or lost, but their preferred position didn't prevail at that regulatory rulemaking body. And so they come to the legislature again to try and tell them what to do. And in this case, it's a little bit of a variation on that theme. It's not the same thing. It's just saying, well, we want localities to be able to tell them that they were wrong, and we want to do it a different way and give a local option to do that. I don't have any issue with what you're trying to do, and I believe that you're in the sincerity of what you're trying to do, and it would promote safety, and that you believe that, and the folks in Loudoun County that you represent believe that too. I just am always hesitant to begin to open that Pandora's box of second guessing the results and the outcomes that we've asked these boards to do these things. And then they tell us how they think it should be done, and for having us, create ends around to the rulemaking process that they have there, and particularly with the building code, because there are a number of folks from all sorts of ends of the political spectrum and otherwise that have specific items and issues and concerns with the way our building code works that would love to have us, install their position or overrule what happens. And so, just as a historical matter, that's something that this committee and subcommittee have been reluctant to do. So, just for background, with that. I told you you'd get the last word in there. I took it, but at any rate, the committee operates by motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to lay the bill gently on the table.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to lay the bill on the table. That is the most superior of the motions we've got, except for adjourning, and it is not debatable. So we'll put that vote on the board. The clerk will close the roll. And the bill is laid gently on the table. Thank you, Delegate Martinez. I appreciate your effort.
Thank you.
All right. Delegate Shin. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you,
Got
Mr.
a bill.
Chairman.
Two bills.
Two bills.
All right, and one of these bills, I think we talked about your desired outcome. If you'll remind me which one they were and tell me what we said we would do, I'll do it.
Sure. For the desired outcome one that we had previously discussed, it's House Bill 922.
Okay, and this is a bill, that bill that we thought you need some more time to try and get together with the stakeholders and thought that would benefit from the unique position we're in this even number year to carry it over under Rule 22 to calendar year 2025. So that's a voice vote. Is there a motion to carry this bill over under Rule 22? Second. It's been moved and properly seconded that the bill be carried over. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. So 922 is carried over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
All right, and then you have 917.
That would
be
a
very good bill. Go ahead.
There's no bias there.
I don't put my fingers on the scale at all here. Delegate Shin.
Well, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about this very good bill, House Bill 917. And I believe there is a technical amendment that has been prepared by council.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we adopt the technical amendment. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion is agreed to. We have the bill as amended before us. Delegate Shin.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment is just on line 280 after by, comma, strike the word or.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable that we voted on that? Yes. Okay. Without objection.
Thank you very much.
Delegate Shin.
The purpose of House Bill 917, is to make wholesaling defined in the bill as the buying and selling of contracts for compensation a licensed real estate activity. Making this a licensed real estate activity would allow the real estate board to have oversight and enforcement power over these kinds of practices. Wholesaling currently often targets vulnerable populations who may not be fully aware of the pros and cons of such contracts. And while this bill looks much longer than it actually is, when the definitions were changed in MOVE, other citations through their code also needed to reflect those changes, and that's why the bill looks a little bit lengthier than maybe we wanted it to. I've also got the realtors here in case there are any questions from the committee.
All right, are there any questions from the committee for Delegate Shin or for anyone she might pick as a phone a friend? All right. Hearing none, we've got anyone here in the room who wishes to speak in favor of the bill. And I'm going to let you speak a little bit more, maybe expand a little bit on the need for this bill, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Erin Corman with the Realtors. I want to thank Delegate Shin for bringing this bill on our behalf. We are trying to target a very specific aspect of wholesaling where an unlicensed person is approaching a home seller, putting that house under contract, and then assigning their interest in the contract to someone else for a fee. So that is the very specific practice that we are trying to get at. And just by adding that as a license activity, we're not prohibiting it. We're just saying that if you do it more than or 2 or more times in a year, that you should have a real estate license. And that will mean that all the same disclosures need to be made. DPOR will have oversight. They'll have to follow the same codes and regs as any other real estate licensee. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I would ask you a quick question. So is it the case that sometimes what these wholesalers do is they find somebody, maybe an estate sale or somebody who's got distressed property, they offer them a relatively low price and then will sell it at fair market value, which could be tens of thousands of dollars in excess of what the original seller was going to sell it for, and never have to disclose to that seller that the house is actually worth tens of thousands of dollars more than they offered to purchase for it?
So the practice that we're trying to get at, they never ever take possession of the house.
Right.
So they'll go to somebody who's maybe not familiar with the real estate market, maybe an elderly person, or the house has been in an estate sale or something. They'll offer a price, say, I'm just going to give you a flat price for this house. It's very easy, just sign this contract. They don't have to make any disclosures. They don't have to tell the person what the house would be valued for on the open market. They put the house under contract, and then they find someone else who would be interested in a house priced so well, and they assign their interest over to another person who will become the buyer for some sort of compensation. So they never actually have to spend $1 to get under contract on that house, and then they sell it before they close.
Thank you. All right, any other questions from the subcommittee? Anybody here wishing to speak? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the bill?
Chairman, members of the committee, Laura Dodds with Housing Opportunities Made Equal, and we support the bill.
Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the bill? All right, Delegate Shin, would you like a last word, or are you good to go? All right.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded to the bill report as amended. The clerk will open the roll. The clerk will close the roll. A very good bill passes a vote of 8-0. Thank you,
Mr. Chair, members.
All right. Delegate Bulova, you want to go next, or do you want to? Why don't you? We have some members of the subcommittee as well, but why don't you have you go first, Mr. Big Chair?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 3 bills. You want me to start with the easiest one first?
Okay.
And then we'll get to the hard one. All right. The first one is House Bill 876, and I do have a substitute with technical changes if we could adopt the substitute.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we adopt the substitute. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is before us. Do we have copies of the substitute? It's online. Where am I supposed to put my computer? All right. Go ahead, Delegate Boulevard.
Thank you,
I'll
Mr.
try and read
Chair.
it while you present.
So last year, this body passed the Resale Disclosure Act. That was actually a bill that I had the pleasure of being able to carry. And what that did was bring together all the resale disclosure provisions related to common interest communities under one statute. So that really helped with streamlining and standardizing the resale process to ensure that there was a consistent set of documents that things could be referred to. However, I think is often the case in these situations, once a new law is put in place, there's kind of a testing out period. As a result, practitioners have actually identified a couple areas that could benefit from clarification. And that's what the impetus of the bill is. Just really quickly, the major points in here are it clarifies where a seller or a purchaser's agent can perform actions required in the Act, such as order an updated resale certificate. It clarifies that a purchaser cannot waive their right to receive a resale certificate from the seller. Includes some compromise language on how payment for a financial update that is ordered right before closing is to be handled, and clarifies the exemption for providing a resale certificate in the case of a new construction. And finally, the bill addresses some confusion with regard to the contract termination period. So this is actually something that has been worked on for a couple of years. So it used to be that there was a hard deadline after which you couldn't cancel. We changed that later to say, hey, you have a deadline, but then you can mutually agree to cancel afterwards. That still got confusing in here because you had both language in there. And so the new language just states that the termination period is up to the parties, whatever they agree to. And if they don't agree to something, the default is 3 days. So those are the technical changes in here. Stakeholders have worked together, and to my knowledge, there's peace in the valley on this piece of legislation, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Boulevard, can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
And maybe somebody else can help you with this one. Line 150 of the substitute. I haven't seen it yet. So line 150 of the substitute says the seller shall be responsible for all fees associated with the preparation and delivery of the financial update unless the settlement agent or other requesting a party agrees to pay such fees. So does that mean if I, as the settlement agent, supposing I was a settlement agent, if I said I'll pay to get the financial update, that the seller is no longer responsible for it just because I was willing to upfront the money?
Mr. Chair, why don't I let the experts answer that question for you?
No. Does not mean that. That's definitely not the intent. I think the intent of the language was that we did have some closing attorneys or settlement agents that wanted to be able to front the money so that the financial update order process moved along more quickly. And in the current language, they felt they weren't able to do that because it said the seller had to do it.
So with Delegate Bowman, would you consider it to be a friendly amendment if on line 151, we put a period after update and struck the rest of the line? Because I don't think that would prohibit a settlement agent from agreeing to enter into agreement with the seller to front them the money if they wanted to, or for any other requesting party to agree to front the money as long as they get the money, but it doesn't change who's responsible for it. So it just says the seller will be responsible for the fees associated with the preparation and delivery of the financial update, period. So that sets that out. But I don't think if we strike the language after the word update that prevents anybody else from paying for it. But I think that if you leave it, and Delegate Coiner may have something I want to be the only one who does this kind of work on the subcommittee. But I think if you leave it the way it is, that once I pay for it, the seller can say, I'm no longer on the hook for it.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Coiner.
I would concur with that. You know, I think what folks who are handling these do, they have an upfront agreement that someone signs when they're coming to do the closing, and in it should say, if you want to make sure you get paid, you are aware that you're going to be responsible for X. Our office will front those costs as part of handling your services. If this doesn't close, you'll still be responsible. That's typically the type of agreement that is done. So I would agree with the chair that that friendly amendment would be beneficial.
Do you want to have this one by temporarily so that you guys can think about it, or are you guys good?
Mr. Chair, look, or maybe not.
Like, what's Simon
Give
doing
us
to this again?
2 seconds, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, Nicole Brenner with Reed Smith on behalf of the Virginia Association of Community Managers. The only issue I would sorry. I just ran a couple
messing
floors.
With your bill, run.
If you want to pay because you don't want to wait for the seller to pay for the financial update, some agents, settlement agents, closing attorneys, realtors want to pay for it immediately. I think especially if you want your deals to close quickly and it's a large sale. So what we're doing is allowing you the option to pay. The seller is responsible unless you agree. The way that works for the community managers is we have a software system where third parties allowed to request the documents. So closing attorney, realtor can go in and request the documents. They can pay themselves and put in the request for the financial update, or they can select third-party pay, which is the seller, and it's ultimately their responsibility, which is reflected in the language. And then we send an electronic invoice to the seller. That's what happens in practice. I think that's what's reflected in the language. My only concern with removing your option to pay is that then it's just the seller.
So I'm not, I understand that you guys want something explicit to tell the community managers you have to take the money from the settlement agent, but I don't think that that's what this language does. I think it changes the responsibility for it. And if there was a sentence that said, notwithstanding, no community management shall refuse to accept payment from a settlement agent, or some words to that effect, you could maybe accomplish that piece of it without shifting the responsibility. Delegate Coiner.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I don't know if I want to go to buy temporarily and go work on this, but I do have some thoughts on how to fix it where the issue could be addressed. I'm happy to say it now or.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Price.
Yes, can this bill go by temporarily?
Yeah, why don't we take, I love this bill. I think it's very important, and I think that it's going to pass, but I do think that it might benefit from a few minutes to try and work something out on
by
this.
temporarily would be fantastic.
All right, is there a motion to go by temporarily? Without objection, by temporarily.
Yeah, sorry.
You have another easy one?
I'm never going to say that again. This one's a really tough one, Mr. Chair. Anyways, this is House Bill 880, and this is a recommendation of the Virginia Housing Commission. It's the product of a really pretty extraordinary compromise among stakeholders, and quite honestly, it's an issue that we dealt with for years, and if I was to have guessed that we would have had a consensus bill on this, I would have told you were nuts. But for those of you who are new on the subcommittee, you may or may not be aware that under current law, a common interest community has the authority to record a lien for non-payment of an assessment in any amount, right? So there's no minimum on that. And this lien is enforceable by a non-judicial foreclosure process, so it doesn't have to go through the courts. And so that's actually been the law in Virginia since the first condominium law in 1962. This is different than the regular judicial foreclosure process that you use in other cases, which says the amount needs to be greater than $25,000 if you're involving a primary residence. And I was just reminded by our council that we need to adopt a substitute.
I was a little surprised there wasn't a substitute. So it's a motion so moving probably second we adopt a substitute. As many as favor of the motion will say aye. As opposed, no. The substitute is now before us.
All right, so the issue that we wrestled with is how do you ensure that you don't have non-foreclosure for very small amounts while also recognizing that common interest communities are in a very different situation because the cumulative impacts of people not paying their assessments can have a real big impact on their ability to pay for basic services or upkeep and maintenance of common areas. And so, again, after a year of trying, we finally had a breakthrough. What the bill does is a couple of things. So first and foremost, recognizing that foreclosure should be the last resort, House Bill 1880 sets a $5,000 minimum threshold for non-judicial foreclosure exclusive of attorney fees and court costs. And so again, we're going from no limit in terms of non-judicial foreclosures to saying, hey, it has to be more than $5,000. The second is that it reduces the threshold for a common interest community to go through judicial foreclosure to $5,000. And that's actually because there are benefits to both the property owner and the common interest community to go through the judicial process. And so this is just an incentive to say, hey, we're going to equalize that 5,000, but all told, it might be better to go through that judicial process, and we want to preserve that option. Then finally, what the bill does is protects against overly aggressive assessment collection practices by extending the life of the lien from 3 to 10 years. And so this just makes sure that if you've got a lien with a short fuse, that you're not forcing a common interest community to engage in the foreclosure process too early. So the bill also has some clarifying language around the foreclosure process. But again, Mr. Chair, I think it's a great thing that the people were able to come to the table and make sure that if you live in a CIC, there should be at least a $5,000 threshold in order to go through the foreclosure process.
Thank you for that explanation. Any questions from members of the subcommittee? That one seems pretty straightforward. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the bill? You can be brief.
Good afternoon. Pia Trigiani. That's the longest name in the room, probably. But thank you, Delegate Bulova, for bringing the bill. We worked on the miracle bill, we'll call it the miracle bill of the session, to try and balance interests. But we're supportive of the bill. Thank you.
Okay, and?
Erin Corman with the Realtors. We support the bill as well.
Chris Mero with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. We also support the bill.
All right, so the condo folks, the HOA folks, the builders, and the VPLC all love this bill. That is a miracle.
It is a miracle.
All right. You don't need a last word. Can we get a motion to report?
So moved.
Motion to report the substitute.
With substitute? So moved and properly seconded. So it's been moved and properly seconded. This bill report with substitute. As many as favor that motion will indicate on the electronic voting board. The clerk will close the roll, and the bill reports by a vote of 5-3. So not as much peace in the valley as we thought, but it's still a good bill, though.
Not quite as much of a miracle as I thought. There we go.
All right, you have one more. Well, you have two more. You have one more, and then we'll come back
one
to that
more, and then we'll go back. So the last one is House Bill 1209, dealing with reserve studies and special assessments. For those of you who sit on the Housing Commission, this was not a Housing Commission recommendation, but you'll recognize the issues because they were discussed in the Housing Commission. And I think we all remember the 2021 tragedy in Florida, where you had a condominium that collapsed that ultimately resulted in the tragic deaths of 98 people. I think adding to that tragedy is the fact that there were tons of warning signs that something like this could happen. The community knew that there were structural issues, but they were kicked down the road to go ahead and deal with later. When one very brave board finally stepped in and imposed some special assessments, it was too late. It was literally a couple weeks afterwards that they took action, that the tragedy occurred. What many people probably don't know, although I bet Delegate Bennett Parker probably knows this and Delegate Simon knows this, is that we actually had a similar close call here in Virginia in 2017 with the River Towers condominium in Alexandria that had to be evacuated when one wing of the condominium dropped and shifted several inches because of extensive water damage. And in that case, fortunately, it was only just 32 families that had to be displaced, but they actually had to jack the whole condominium back up, which cost a lot of money. As a result of these two incidents, the General Assembly, so we went ahead and passed Senate Bill 740 in 2022, and what we did is to direct DPOR to establish a work group to do two things. So one, to look at the adequacy of our laws dealing with structural integrity, and two, maintaining reserves to repair, replace, and restore capital components in common interest communities. It was a very robust process, right? And so DPOR solicited the assistance of George Mason University Center for Regional Analysis. Virginia Tech was involved. and also Old Dominion University's Dragas Center for Economic Analysis and Policy. And they actually met over 18 months and brought in just an extraordinarily broad range of stakeholders. And that report was released in April 2023 and made 20 recommendations. As you can imagine, when you're dealing with something like this, some of them were not easy. Not all of them were legislative, but when you're dealing with capital infrastructure, again, it's really important, but it can also be expensive to have to go ahead and deal with. That said, when this was reported to the Housing Commission, we challenged the chair of that work group to let us know what were the lowest hanging fruit that would make the most difference. And so there were 3 items, and that's what's reflected in this bill. The first one is a recommendation to remove statutory language allowing owners to rescind special assessments for maintenance, replacement, and repair of capital components. And so under current law, if a board makes the hard decision to impose a special assessment to meet their capital reserve, it can actually be reversed by a majority of members at an association meeting. So that's not in their declaration. We've said, as a matter of law, that they can go ahead and do that. And what it basically does is encourage looking at short-term interests rather than long-term financial stability. The report noted that this is particularly problematic in investor-owned communities where the focus tends to be on immediate aesthetics rather than long-term structural and maintenance issues. The second recommendation is to confirm board authority to meet capital needs through replacement reserves, additional assessments, and borrowed funds. And by that, they noted that one of the biggest problems is that common interest communities have to rely on getting a majority vote of all association members in order to impose an assessment. And that's a really high bar to get and almost impossible. And so the language on line 324 just ensures consistent authority for the board to meet repair and replacement needs. And then the last one finally says that boards should have the authority to borrow for structural components or fund recommended reserves. And so again, capital can be very expensive. The anticipated cost to deal with the Florida situation was $16.2 million. And so if you're not allowed to borrow, that means you're going to have some sky-high assessments, and that's a lot to take all at once and slows down the process. And so by allowing for these boards to borrow, you are able to make the repairs sooner, but you're also able to spread those costs over a larger period of time to keep that down and also make sure that future property owners are also part of the solution. Again, Mr. Chair, none of these are particularly easy, and I understand that this is providing common interest communities, particularly the board, some additional authority, but I think it would also be a tragedy for us to commission this very extensive study, for them to come up with, I thought, were very, very good recommendations, and then for us not to go ahead and take action on those recommendations. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the bill.
Delegate Bulova, you have I just want to make sure I understand one piece of it here, and I'm sorry for reading it late. There's a 55.1/1825 new section D that says, unless the declaration provides otherwise, the board of directors may borrow money on behalf of the association for any valid purpose and have the right and power to assign and pledge all revenues received, including annual assessments, to secure the repayment from time to time. That's not specifically related to a lack of reserves or a need for structural maintenance. That's just where you're going to say, unless the declaration reserves that right to the members themselves, all boards will now have a statutory authority to borrow money on behalf of the association and pledge that stream of revenue from the assessments as collateral.
Which line is that, Mr. Chair?
I'm looking at it in the highlight mode. Hold on, I'll tell you in PDF. Just 1 second.
Oh, there we go.
Did you see it?
So line 114, the board of directors shall have the discretion to meet repair and replacement requirements through replacement reserves, additional assessments, and borrowed funds. And then I think there was another one. Yeah, the board of directors may borrow money on behalf of the association for any valid purpose and shall have the right and the power to assign and pledge those revenues.
So that's why I guess that's a really, so the one's sort of a narrow authority to borrow to meet these maintenance needs, but then this extra paragraph seems to be pretty wide open. Is that intentional?
Mr. Chair, While I think borrowing can be a very prudent tool, I can also kind of understand that it gets a little bit out of the lane that we're trying to go ahead and deal with, which is the capital and maintenance reserves. And if it's the will of the subcommittee to tighten that up, I would consider that to be a friendly amendment.
I'll hold off on necessarily striking it. It seems maybe broader, it's an elected board, but they're only up for election every so often, and they could mortgage the whole thing and not have to put that to a vote of the membership. Seems like it might be ripe for some abuse.
Understand the concern, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Open to
any questions from other members of the subcommittee? All right. Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Pia Trigiani, I served as the chair of the work group that conducted the study, which included a number of people in the room, actually, and also every interest group that affects and touches insurance, attorneys, local government officials. And this, as Delegate Bulova very well described, what the intention is to give associations the authority to and the ability to preserve the assets of the association and take care of the capital improvements. We support the bill.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the bill? Pia, don't go too far. I might have a question for you. Mr. Gianni. All right, no one else. Did you hear my question about Section D, and do you have an opinion? Again, I don't have a strong opinion about it. Do you have a strong opinion about it? Let me ask you that.
Yes, we do. Boards often have juggling. They have a lot of different demands, financial demands to juggle, and so that would include if they're improperly funded on their reserves or otherwise. So there are instances when associations see, and there's a philosophy of some boards not to put aside reserves or not to fund other needed things in the community. So it is drafted, as you described it, it is drafted to allow the authority to borrow. I would say that there are limitations in most condominium instruments that prevent expenditures in excess of a percentage of the budget. Those are holdovers and requirements of the secondary mortgage market lending agencies that said you cannot make any discretionary improvements without a vote. So on balance, there are protections against a runaway board, if you will, that's spending money to put in marble where hardwood is perfectly adequate. Or I was like the flocked wallpaper instead of, the stuff you can wipe down.
Nobody does that.
My mother had flocked wallpaper. It was very nice. But, it's a balance. And some documents still will require a vote. This is not a panacea for everybody. It's for those where the documents are silent and there's no authority.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the subcommittee? So do we ask for anybody wishing to speak in opposition to the bill already? And nobody showed up? All right.
Move to report.
It's moved and properly seconded the bill report. Clerk will open the roll.
Do we have a substitute for amendments on this one?
No substitute.
We're okay. It's just the one before.
I'm just going to flag that issue so I can study it some more. The bill report's by a vote of 7-1.
There we go. I know it's with much love. Thank you, Mr.
Much
Chairman.
love. All right, and we are now back to the bill that went by temporarily. And I know that Delegate Coiner, thank you for helping out, may have a friendly amendment that you'd like to propose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would propose a friendly amendment. I will say, although leaving this to attorneys that are great on general laws to further edit between now and fall, but it would be on the amendment on line 150, the seller shall be responsible for all fees associated with the preparation and delivery of the financial update, comma, delete unless and insert, this shall not preclude a settlement agent or other requesting party, delete the rest of the sentence, insert for paying for such fees up front, whether or not for reimbursement by the seller. That would be my friendly amendment, Mr. Chair, to be further edited by our amazing attorneys.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we adopt the line amendment to address the Simon Coiner concerns. Many in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right. So the bill as with a substitute and line amendment is now before us. I think we've heard a description of what the bill does. This is sort of a cleanup of the Resale Disclosure Act that was carried last year. It's been moved and properly seconded to move the substitute as amended. As many in favor of that motion will indicate so on the electronic voting board. The clerk will close the roll. And the bill reports, I don't see it, 8-0. Didn't go on my screen for some reason. All right. Thank you, Delegate Bulova. Delegate
Thank you,
Fagans.
members of the subcommittee.
Delegate Fagans, go ahead. You have one bill, right?
Correct. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and subcommittee members. I'm here today to submit HB 701 with amendment.
All right. Would you like to, is it a line amendment or is it a substitute?
Line.
The clerk will report the line, the council will report the line amendment. In just a second. I think we're all turning our pages to get there.
Mr. Chairman.
I think there are two line amendments, right?
Correct. On line 39, after notice, strike within 14 days. And on line 40, after the first instance of the word tenant, insert such routine maintenance shall be performed within 14 days of delivery of the notice to the tenant, and the notice shall state the last date on which the maintenance may possibly be performed. Excuse me. And those line amendments are available online.
So it sounds like what we're doing is instead of saying within 14 days, which was a little vague, we're pegging that 14 days to the date of a notice. Is that?
That's correct.
All right. Is there a motion on the line amendments?
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. As many as favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed. So the bill as amended is now before us. Delegate Fagan.
Thank you. So with HB 701, it is to aim to clarify the notification period for routine maintenance and helps protect both renters and landlords' maintenance personnel. Currently, there's only a minimum notification period of 72 hours and not a maximum notification period for routine maintenance. This was an issue that was brought up by a constituent. We have worked in conjunction with the realtors as well as advocates for renters, and we believe that the addition to this code for access is a great solution for both sides. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, and I would hope that the committee will refer this bill to full committee.
All right, are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? Anyone here wishes to speak in favor of the bill? Please come forward. Realtors support it. Anybody else in support?
Erin Corman with the Realtors. Want to thank the delegate for taking the time to answer our questions, and we support the bill.
Okay. Anyone here in opposition to the bill?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I wouldn't necessarily say opposition, just want to make sure we have a point of clarification. My name is Zach Lemaster, here with the Northern Virginia Apartment Association. Our only, I guess, concern or clarification we wanted to have, and I was talking to the delegate about this a minute ago, was kind of what happens if we do not perform the maintenance within the 14-day period. I think that he and the realtors had indicated that they felt that we could do a renotice. I know that there's language on line 38 that says, unless impractical to do so, and I am not an attorney, so I just wanted to clarify, I guess, with you all, if you felt that that also included if it was practical to do the maintenance in that time period. We just didn't want to show up on day 15 and mess up, I guess.
I'm sorry, which line were you asking about?
Line 38 says, unless impractical to do so.
Yeah, I think that I would concur with the assessment of the Realtors Association. I mean, I think that this language is sufficient to satisfy that concern that, again, if you can't do it for some reason, give them another notice. And there's no limit on how many notices y'all could give, so you could just keep noticing and noticing. I think the key is, I think the goal of the legislation is to provide notice and information, right? And so this allows it to be transparent.
Yes, sir. Yeah, no, just
Well, yeah, I mean, we'd like you to get it done quickly too, but. there's
Yes,
not-
sir, we understand.
that
We just
doesn't
want to make sure.
There's nothing punitive in here, right, that I see that says if you fail to, you're
sir.
subject to anything
Yes, sir.
like that.
Nope, we just want to be clear. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if
That
you're
could be,
happy, we're happy.
prices bill next year, but.
Thank you.
All right. Any further questions from the subcommittee? All right, is there a motion?
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded that this bill report with line amendments. The clerk will open the roll. Members will cast their votes. The clerk will close the roll, and Delegate Figgins, your bill reports by a vote of 8-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Subcommittee members.
All right, we have some patrons on the subcommittee, I think, right? Delegate Price, you have a bill? I do. All right, you want to do it from your chair?
That would be great.
That's fine with me. Let's go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Too many of our residents are living in conditions that are unsafe and unhealthy. Though they may have submitted work requests and have submitted complaints, their requests have gone unheard and unresolved. Some of the wonderful residents that I've had the pleasure to meet invited me into their homes to see for myself what they're experiencing, and I can only explain this as them living under slumlords. What's appalling, it is appalling what some consider to be okay for their tenants. While this is not a majority of landlords, there are some that have been documented as problematic. In these instances, the tenants feel helpless, and the current possible tools the localities have are inadequate to get these issues addressed. So as we know, localities can issue citations and take landlords to court, but they are limited to getting the landlords fined or having the properties condemned, and neither of these help the tenants get the fixes they need to have the safer and healthier living conditions. And a lot of local officials rightfully are skittish in condemning properties because a lot of our residents don't have anywhere else to go, and that could potentially increase the number of families experiencing being unhoused. So House Bill 597 would grant localities the authority to enforce the health and safety provisions of the VRLTA, and therefore help protect the communities they serve by allowing for local officials to make their communities healthier, protect the rights of tenants, promote conciliation between tenants and landlords through state intervention, and increase landlord compliance with those health and safety provisions. So many of these families need help in fighting back. They can't afford lawyers or don't have time to take off from work in order to work through the court system. And so this would be localities doing that on their behalf. So in addition to Newport News, there are cities like Richmond and Franklin that have been in the news for condemned properties due to needed repairs. And this bill would help keep those families in their homes. This bill was first introduced in 2022. We have had bipartisan support. There are more than 40 organizations that support this, and so I will not read that list, but I can put it on our website. And we hope that this subcommittee will put this bill back in front of the governor so we can continue this conversation.
All right, is there anyone in the subcommittee wishing with questions about the bill for the patron? Anyone in the audience who wishes to indicate their support for the bill, please stand up. All right. We have one or two speakers, if that's okay, because I think the bill's going to do very well. Do you want to come forward and say something, sir?
I would like to submit some documents to you from your housing inspector about these problems.
Okay.
I have a problem. Apartment next to me was deemed as a biohazard, where feces and urine was in the apartment for almost a year. The housing inspector, if I can, submit these documents to you so that you can peruse them while I'm talking.
Sure, we can pass those around, that'd be fine. All right, thank you. Go ahead.
I mean, I'm sure we all realize nothing goes on without the compliance of someone helping them. These people are people who don't have the incomes, the sums of money to have lawyers or people speak for them. I'm advocating for myself, but in hopes that my advocation also speak for these other people. There's no apartment complex where minorities are that there's not horrific conditions. If you come to the complex I'm in now, there's garbage all over. It looks like a garbage dump. We pay for garbage. We pay for maintenance. It would seem to me that everybody's aware of the problem, but nobody has a fix. We're putting Band-Aids on canker sores. This is not going to work. Not only are we jeopardizing the lives of taxpayers, but our kids. Something has to be done. I mean, we're here now trying to mitigate this situation. And I'm saying to you, this has gone on year after year. It's not like everyone is not aware of the problem. We're aware of the problem. We need a fix now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, please.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that had some remarks? I want to make sure they get to deliver. And again, I see that we can have you all stand up again, make sure the camera gets the shot of how many folks are here in support. But go ahead. Come on up.
Hi, my name is Sofia Vega. I am a volunteer and previous organizer for New Virginia Majority, which is one of the organizations that is advocating for this bill. As an organizer throughout my years in New Virginia Majority, I've been able to work with hundreds, if not thousands, of tenants who have been affected by the lack of repairs in their apartments. They live in absolutely deplorable conditions, as Delegate Price mentioned. Some are unlivable, and I just wanted to advocate for this bill because I know that the current laws in place make it extremely difficult for tenants to be able to get these repairs. I also believe that this bill would help a collective instead of the individual. At the moment, these laws only help the individual. So these people might get their repairs, but if something happens in the future where they need repairs again, they're going to have to go through that whole procedure all over again, and their next door neighbors are going to be victims of the same abuse. You know, they don't have time, they don't have the bravery to go up against the person who chooses whether they have a roof to live under or not. And so I just wanted to provide my support for this bill alongside New Virginia Majority, and I really hope that you guys are able to advocate for it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, one more time, if everybody who's here to support was also here to support, if you guys can stand up for just a second so we can get a camera shot, and I don't know if we can pan that far. And we've got also, looks like the Realtors Association, the builders and others, and VAMA and AOBA are all on board, so we're all there. Thank you guys very much. And VPLC, I see you all out there too. All right, anybody here to speak in opposition to the bill? All right, back to the committee.
To report. Second.
It's been moved and seconded the bill report. As many as favor of that motion will indicate with. Okay, so it's going to be reported and referred. We have a letter from the speaker that says that he wants courts to have a look at it, so they'll come to my civil sub too. But at any rate, the motion is to report and refer to courts. That's the motion I heard. It's been properly seconded, so the clerk will put that up on the board. All right, the clerk will close the roll. The bill is reported and referred to the Committee on Courts of Justice by a vote of 8-0. All right, is that your only one, Delegate Price? All right, Delegate Coiner, you have a bill?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I do have a bill. It is a bill that came out of work of the Housing Commission. I'd like to start by apologizing to my fellow Housing Commission member and our chairman, Delegate Bulova. I did change my vote on House Bill 880. For those of you who may not know who are new, our Housing Commission, we do work really hard to get bills in good form to come before all our committees, and we support them when they keep going. And I was busy working on the other bill for him, so that's my excuse for voting incorrectly. Mr. Chair, I do have before you House Bill 477. This is the eviction diversion pilot program. It hopefully is familiar to folks. This would extend the expiration of the eviction diversion pilot program 1 year to July 1st, 2025. It was enacted July 2020 within the General District Courts. I will say the pilot was effective in preventing evictions of tenants who use the program. We, though, the Housing Commission has been following through and looking at the data that comes back, and we would like additional time to continue collecting more data and ensuring that we have less evictions. And so with that, Mr. Chair, that is what House Bill 477 does.
So if I'm reading this correctly, Delegate Coiner, it just changes 2024 and adds 2025?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right, that's probably the shortest bill we've got.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from members of the subcommittee? Anyone here wishing to speak? Or anyone here in favor of the bill? I see some nodding heads. Stand up. All right, anybody here in opposition to the bill? Nobody in opposition? All right.
Move to report.
It's been moved and seconded the bill report. As many as fair to that motion will say aye. Or no, we won't. We'll go on the board. Sorry. I wish it was that easy. We'll go ahead and vote on it, actually. The clerk will close the roll. That bill reports 8-0. Finally, Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have HB 1105. It's about local government incentive program for housing production. I'd like first, Mr. Chairman, to move a technical amendment which adds manufactured homes to my bill.
Clerk, is it a line amendment? Clerk, or Madam Counsel, if you would, Ms. Binns, if you would report the amendments.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. On line 93, after printed, comma, strike and on line 93, after prefabricated, insert, comma, manufactured, comma, and duplex manufactured. And those are available online.
So motion on the amendments? It's been moved and seconded. We adopt the line amendments as reported by council. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, the motion, the amendments are agreed to. The bill as amended is now before us. Delegate Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. HB 1105 would implement a recommendation from a 2021 JLARC study of the state's affordable housing needs. It creates a new program at DHCD to provide financial incentives for localities that modify their zoning ordinance to facilitate the development of more affordable housing. This bill acknowledges that statewide zoning mandates may not be effective for every locality and instead seeks to encourage localities to adopt currently available but underutilized zoning ordinances. Mr. Chairman and committee members, this bill passed general laws unanimously last year, but due to questions over the fiscal impact, was tabled in appropriations. I hope the subcommittee would consider reporting this bill and referring it to appropriations, where we can consider an appropriate amount to make it an effective grant program.
All right, so what I'm hearing is that this subcommittee's kind of opined on the substance of it before and it got out unanimously, and this is sort of a necessary step here for us to get it back in front of appropriations to talk about the money piece of it.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Right.
I think Tracy Smith is here from JLARC to answer any questions if there are any.
All right, is anybody here wishing to, any questions from members of the subcommittee for JLARC or for the sponsor? All right, seeing none, sometimes it's good to go last, right? Is there anybody here wishing to speak in favor of the bill? Come forward, and again, you guys can be brief.
Mr. Chairman, Paul Battaglia, AIA Virginia, which is the state-level component of the American Institute of Architects. We support this bill that incentivizes the development of affordable housing and therefore diversifies and betters our built environment and our communities.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the subcommittee. Isabel McLean with the Virginia Housing Alliance, and we support this bill because it supports policies for more affordable, diverse, and dense housing, which we desperately need. It would remove the burden of what could be an expensive and lengthy process of revising zoning codes, designing programs, making such changes possible. Thank you.
Thank you. These are well-timed comments, too.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Sheila Herlihy with the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. We support the bill for the reasons stated, as well as people of faith. We want to create more opportunities for those in need in our communities. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Randy Grumbine, representing the Virginia Manufactured and Modular Housing Association. We'd like to thank the delegate for adding the amendment. That much appreciated. And we just say that this opens eyes to creativity with local officials to see ways to get more affordable houses on the ground.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Erin Corman with the Realtors, and for all the reasons already spoken, we support the bill as well.
Anyone here to speak in opposition to the bill? All right, can I get a motion to report and refer to appropriations as amended?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded the bill report and refer to appropriations with amendments. The members will indicate their preference on the electronic voting board. Look at that. It took me to the last one, but I got the motion right this time. The clerk will close the roll. That bill is recommended for reporting and referral to appropriations by a vote of 8-0. believe that completes the docket, and this meeting of the Housing Subcommittee is adjourned.